I'd like to go ahead and introduce Raube, who's going to be moderating this conversation. So Raube is an adjunct professor at Haas and the executive director of the International Business Development Program, which is a global management consulting program here at Haas. Both Lauren and I got to participate in that last year, and it was fabulous. She is also the Associate Director for Institute for Business and Social Impact and the Executive Director of the Graduate Program in Health Management. She's a very busy woman. And then it gives me another great pleasure to introduce Paige. She's the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Digital Services at Kaiser Permanente. She leads the National Marketing, Digital Services, and Product Innovation for Kaiser, the nation's largest nonprofit health system. She's also responsible for the development of consumer and employer customer digital functions, including e-commerce capabilities and online clinical features. She was instrumental in developing the landmark Thrive brand advertising campaign, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and now in its 9th year. She received her BA from USC, as did I, so go Trojans, and a PhD in political science from UC Berkeley. Go Bears, of course, where she did her PhD with an emphasis on comparative political development in Italian administrative politics. So please join me in welcoming both Kristi and Christine.
So before we start, I wanted, putting on my hat as the Associate Director of our new Institute for Business and Social Impact, which we launched here at the school in November and brings together many of the school's activities, our healthcare program, the Global Social Venture Competition, our Center for Nonprofit and Public Leadership, and our Center for Responsible Business. And one of the things that we've been working on, and just a day ago came to a consensus about what the name of it was going to be, is that we are working on an initiative called Valuing Women in Business. And it's really to focus our attention, thought leadership, courses, what we do for our alumni, and research on the role of women in business, and trying to rectify the fact that, as you know, women are not in the highest ranks of most organizations, on boards, in startups, in technology, on and on. And so it's an opportunity for us at the school to really start to think about those issues and how we can make that a different future for our students and for all of us here. But now I want to talk to Christine, who I had the pleasure of meeting over the last year when Professor Lynn Upshaw and I worked on writing a case about Kaiser. And Christine is the protagonist in the case. And so over that time, I had an opportunity to learn lots about what Christine does and to learn even more about Kaiser, even though I have to admit that my husband also works at Kaiser with Christine. So I have all these points that connect me over here to Christine. So we really wanted to have a conversation with Christine to talk about her career, her path, how she's found it, and how that might be an example for all of us and the lessons that she's learned. And, this conference is about designing your future. And so the first really obvious question is, how does somebody with a PhD in political science, I can't even remember what your area was, end up being the head of marketing for a huge organization like Kaiser?
Well, it's very straightforward, certainly. Thank you for having me here today. I love being back on the campus. I had some of my happiest time being here as a PhD student. And at the time when I did that, which was late 70s, I absolutely never would have predicted sitting in this chair, having this conversation with you. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. So I did the normal kind of academic path, and I began my career as a tenure-track professor at Notre Dame in Indiana after leaving here. And then the first kind of little bump in the road occurred, which was I'm not Catholic, and it suddenly became really problematic to keep your job there if you weren't Catholic, which was a surprise because they had been on a very heavy secularization path, which is why I got recruited, along with most of the other faculty were not Catholic, believe me. So anyway, so it kind of, it put a dent in my idealism, I'd say, about academia. But the real issue is I was with and then married another academic, and finding two academic positions in one place is like crazy impossible.
Right.
And so I was there, and this thing came up with the religion, and I left, and I went and taught a couple years in Texas, which is where he was. And at that point, I think it was really clear to me that it was a buyer's market, not a seller's market in academics. And trying to reconcile the two career thing, it was not going to work. So we both came back to the Bay Area, had about zero contacts, right, in the business world, but cold called and talked to people and then sort of translated what we knew how to do into really cool careers, both of us, and very different ones, but really cool.
So tell me more about that. Like, what was the first job, and how did you even get yourself into that?
Okay, so I did have the benefit of a couple of people who blazed the trail before, which were two ex-political scientists who had found themselves in healthcare doing corporate research, so market research and other kinds of analytics. And I managed to convince one of them that I had the skills to come and fill a job opening that he had, and it was in survey research, and I had done like 1/4 of polling analysis and 1/4 of statistics, and so it took a lot of talking my way into it because he thought I wasn't quantitative enough. Anyway, so that was for Blue Cross of California at the time. And I went there, and at that time, I didn't know this when I joined, but they were on a path to consolidate operations in Southern California. So I joined, and everybody else in the department left, which was fantastic, because I got to do everybody's job. And so I got to learn so much. And then after a year, one of the vice presidents came up from Southern California and fired the department. And the great thing was that so many of the people had migrated to Kaiser Permanente over the last year. I had another job in 3 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and how long now have you been at Kaiser? So it's been a long run now.
It'll be 26 years.
Yeah,
Next
that's
month.
Amazing. So, this conference is about designing your future, but it doesn't seem like you really designed it. Like, you sort of things happened, and so so was it more planned than it sounds? Or?
Yeah, well, a little bit. Okay, so I did make a few good decisions. Okay,
obviously.
So one was, and this was more once I started at Kaiser Permanente, because things settled out a little bit. Not everybody was leaving, right?
Right.
And I was originally working in a job forecasting utilization. It's a healthcare organization. And I think the first thing I did that I think was really good was an opportunity came up in a pretty short period of time for 2 management roles. And because I had a PhD already, I was a little older than the other kids in this analytics group, I was a good candidate for that. One was survey research, which I knew all about, and the other one was doing revenue forecasting, econometric modeling, which I knew something about. And I went for the one that was less comfortable because it was closer to the core of the business. And so the first really, I think, important design principle, right, was picking something that was much closer to the core processes that were at the heart of the organization. And that was great training for the rest of my career, because I really learned how the business worked.
So, I think that's really interesting because, many of us have read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book, and I think it was there, although I could be misattributing this, that she says that women wait till they know 100% of whatever the job description is, but men, if you have 40% of the skills, you go and you apply or try to get the job. And it seems to me that, your first example of like, I had 1/4 of statistics and 1/4 during survey research, but you kind of talked your way in. And then in this second example, you're like, okay, I'm going to do this harder thing, even though maybe I don't know as much. So can you talk a little bit about this idea of sort of, going for something even when maybe it was kind of hard for you to take on these roles?
I think, so I think the leaving academic part, even though it was definitely my choice and I was very ready to do it, it's a little traumatic, right? You spend a lot of years leading up, this.
Yes.
You spend a lot of years, right? And I'd lived in Italy, I'd learned another language, I wrote the dissertation, I did the whole deal. And so when I shifted, I almost felt like I had nothing to lose in a way. It's kind of a funny thing because I'd made this big switch. And so I think it was, maybe that's empowering in some way, to think that you don't know what the path is. And so taking a bit more risk. So I think that choice was one of the things. The other thing is, and I have to say maybe it's a little me, but that pattern is sustained over my whole career. I just keep volunteering for things.
Well, and so when we were talking in advance of this, one of the things you said is that you always approach projects at work by saying, I can do that, sort of raising your hand. And so how has that can-do mindset really impacted your career? Like, can you give us an example of
Yeah. So my husband, the fellow academic, had gotten a job working for the founders of Intel in Silicon Valley. And so socially, and kind of learning about his job, and socially all the people I knew were in the Valley. And this was a while ago, so it was the time of semiconductor chips rather than Google, right? It's like before that. But so I was living kind of in that world, and then I'd go to work, and there was no sign that people were thinking about the revolution that was coming and the way business was transforming. So I actually, and I didn't think maybe because we'd been academics together, I didn't think that my understanding of that was any less valid than my understanding in my own job, right? Because we were always sharing everything we knew about everything. And so I'd be, back at the ranch at Kaiser Permanente, and I would be saying things like, there's this e-commerce stuff going on over there. We could be thinking about this. And got people interested in it, and then they said, well, maybe we should. And I said, okay, I'll get us started. Maybe I won't be able to do it all the way, but I'll get us started. And that was 12 years ago, and now I have the complete privilege, I would say, of getting to lead the, foremost online digital health experience that exists anywhere. And it's just, I think, taking you kind of have to compare what you can contribute to something versus maybe what other people have raised their hand and know how to do, and say, I can get us started. Right. I know enough to get us started.
Right. How to ask the questions. Yeah. So many of you maybe have seen something about the Thrive campaign at Kaiser, the fabulous campaign about eating your broccoli and doing all these things, and that's really been under Kristine's watch in addition to all the online stuff. So can you talk a little bit about how that all happened and how you came up with all that and your team and all of that?
All that stuff. Okay. So so if any Kaiser Permanente members here? Hi, guys. Hello. And people know Thrive, right? So that started back in 2004. So we really are now 10 years in.
Wow.
So it's amazing. And at the time, just prior to that, Our organization had been through a bit of a near-death financial thing. We hadn't been advertising. We hadn't been promoting our, much at all. And the whole healthcare industry was, probably, you've seen that ranking of businesses, right? Who's held in the highest esteem and who's in the lowest. So in those days, it was healthcare and airlines. That was it at the bottom, the very, very bottom. And part of it was the HMO, kind of revile. But it wasn't just HMOs, it was like all of healthcare. And because it was seen as all about, being a gatekeeper and denial and all kinds of things. And when we came out of this kind of financial reverse, and there's a lot of change. We got a new CEO, kind of a few different things changed. It felt to me like the right time to at least raise the question of, shouldn't we be thinking a little bit about how to actually build brand here? Because we were always on the receiving end of any bad event in the press and so forth, and we had no protection because we weren't telling our story.
Right.
And it was so both through bad category and some bad events in a bad category. So we were raising the issue, and I think partly because we had a bit of a change in leadership. We had a little bit of openness that we hadn't had before. And then we did a few fortuitous things. So we connected with Scott Bedbury, who had been the lead in Nike's Just Do It campaign. And then he went on to work at Starbucks. And the Third Place, you guys know the Third Place, right? The whole concept, branding concept. And we had him come as a speaker, and I think he was inspired by the model and realized how much potential we had if we actually did something with our brand. So he advised us, and we started to do some insights work to understand, is there a way to overcome this really negative space? And one of the things that I think we learned from him was really to change the questions we were asking. So I was still involved in survey research my whole career, and we'd been always asking, if we change the service, if we message in a different way in the healthcare space, will we get a different result? Will we find something that will resonate better with consumers? And as long as we were asking questions about healthcare, we never got we could never find any positive space. But we changed the question. We started asking not about healthcare, we started asking about health. Now, if I just say that word, right? You feel it, right? You can feel it. And the research totally tracked to that. You start having the conversation about health and how people think about it, and you get into completely different terrain. So that was important, just to get into, try to figure out where's the positive energy instead of the negative. But the second really important thing was understanding how people think about it. And of course, as I'm sure everyone in this room does, health is about what you do, right? It's about how you take care of yourself. It's about balance. It's about the regimes you try to create for yourself and you try and stick to, right? So it's like all that stuff. And your closest advisors are like your mom and your partner and the people in your life. It's not your doctor, right? So that first insight, it's about it's about them, it's about you. It's not about us. That's a big thing for an organization filled with doctors, right? To recognize it's not about us, it's about them. The second big thing was if you could actually get people to think about, like, what would a good healthcare organization look like? What would that be? We got to an understanding that it was this idea of health advocacy. It was this idea that it isn't just about taking care of you when you're sick. It's about anticipating your need, and it's about looking out for you, preventing things from happening. And that was like totally our model. And what's so interesting is we never talked about it. We never talked about how we think about it. We never talked about our beliefs. We never talked about the why, right, of what we do. We talked about, friendly doctors and good quality and, the typical things that everybody else talked about. So this insights work was it turned everything on its head, right? In terms of understanding what's the conversation we need to have. And it found that beautiful opportunity for us to connect really the essence of the organization with what people were looking for.
So was there resistance in the organization? Because all of a sudden I'm your brand, we're going to start this new brand campaign, and we're not talking about you great doctors that we have. We're talking about, broccoli and exercise, and what does that have to do with Kaiser
What does it
anyway?
have to do with anything? Right.
Right.
So our first, So our first campaign in 2004, the big anthemic TV ad begins with, "We stand for broccoli, Pilates, and dental floss." And then it goes on. In the boardroom, when we were presenting this, the reaction was amazement. And the leadership that we have in our organization, especially around decisions like this, is combined with the senior leaders of the medical groups and the health plan hospitals organization. And you can imagine particularly the senior leadership of the medical group, right? Up to now it had all been the friendly doctor and the high quality and everything that everybody else actually in healthcare advertises to. And so it's a wonderful person, the guy who was the head of all the medical groups. I remember we had this conversation, and he said, "Are you serious? Are we seriously going to do this?" And I said, every scrap of research we've done and every intuition we have said this is going to work. And it was really on the strength of the fact that I'd worked with him for about the last 10 years, doing completely left brain work, economic forecasting, modeling, predicting what the rates would be in the market the next year, taking accountability for that conversation the next year. So really a long track record. That was the reason he went along, I think. And the change was instantaneous. It showed in the numbers right away. In fact, the person who was leading market research wouldn't let us release the data that showed the tracking numbers, right, of the ad response. He wouldn't let me use them for about 3 weeks because he kept believing the data were wrong.
Really? Yeah.
Because it was so dramatic and so instantaneous.
Yeah. So, this whole thing of convincing people to do what you think is best. I mean, part of what you said was you would establish credibility. Yeah. But talk a little bit about that. How do you get people to follow you or to accept your recommendations and so on? When you're in the halls of power, the boardroom of power, or whatever. Yeah.
Well, our organization, because it actually is built with so many physicians, is very analytically oriented.
Yeah.
And so even when you're doing work in the brand space, right, which is can be more emotionally nuanced. You bringing in artwork, right? It's very different. You can still use all the analytic justifications and reinforcement of your position. So I think it's finding that and you have to know your culture, right? Now, not all cultures are like that, but ours is extremely that way. And so relying on the data to make the argument about something that most people might believe is resistant to data, is intuitive,
right?
I think is really important for that kind of work. Other projects, I'd say, because there's the other piece of it, is connecting the work to the mission. And that was true actually of the advertising too, which is it was an opportunity to really talk about what we believed as an organization.
Yeah.
Right? What was the interesting thing is in featuring broccoli and related things rather than physicians, we were trying really hard to not pander to the internal culture.
Yeah.
But as soon as we launched it, the internal culture loved it. Because it spoke to a set of commitments and a philosophy about health that everybody had joined for that reason.
Yeah.
And so that's the other piece of it is, because we're in a mission-based organization, it's very persuasive when you can connect the work what people believe and why they came there.
Yeah. So let's take a step away from the Thrive campaign and Kaiser and think more about your career. It's often been said that particularly for women, it's important to have a mentor or to be a mentor, like we all should be helping each other. And I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit about the whole mentoring process. And did you have a mentor and somebody who helped you, or you? What does that mean?
I didn't have a mentor.
Yeah.
I did not have a mentor, and I was the only senior VP on the team I'm a part of for 7 years, or I don't know, a long time. But I have been a mentor to many people, and in fact, in a funny situation, because I was part of a team where my peers were almost exclusively men for quite a long time. It's not true now, but for a long time. But the people on my team were mostly women at the VP level. And so part of my job as their leader, as their manager, was significantly a mentoring role. Even though sometimes one thinks mentors are somebody who's not your boss, right? I mean, that's a typical way of thinking about it. And that can be true. But in this case, I thought, given especially trying to shift the culture, was thinking about how to promote them, how to showcase their work, how to get them promoted to the appropriate level at the right time, building the case, which sometimes takes a few cycles to do. I felt was a big part of my responsibility. But I also mentor women who are not in my team, because there aren't that many senior, or hadn't been that many senior women.
Right, who were in that position to be a mentor even to them.
Yeah.
So when you think about yourself as a leader, do you think you're sort of a natural, innate leader, or is it something that you've had to work on? And you said you didn't have a mentor yourself, so in part you had to mentor yourself to be a leader, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I didn't. I think it must be innate, because I certainly didn't learn. Right. And I think part of it is it was very important for me to land in a place where I believed in the work. So I'm in a place where I really believe. I'm 26 years. I believe in the work, right? Yeah. And I believe in what we're trying to do. And I think being able to connect the work you're doing to the mission of the organization, or the purpose, right, the why, and describe that for people, it actually becomes pretty easy to enlist them in the cause, right? To get them behind you. I think that's been pretty important. I also think you can do that, and you still have to have really good navigation skills. And I think part of the support to strong leadership, of course, is it's being able to read the environment. It's being able to know who needs to be persuaded. It's all of that stuff. So it's both the nuance as well as the vision, I think.
So often people say about women that women are better at reading the environment and sort of understanding how the dynamics work.
Yeah.
And do you buy into that, or do you think that has helped you? I mean, because you were one of the few senior women at Kaiser, when you were...
Whenever that happened, yeah.
Whenever that was.
Whenever that was. I was thinking about the whole question of, what are women assumed to be better at, right? And how's that helped?
Yeah.
So I think, emotional intelligence, right, or reading the environment is one of those things. I think that is a lot true, and I think that has helped. And I've been in this leadership culture long enough to have gone from a period where early on nobody even knew what emotional intelligence was, right? So it was all kind of command. And so now that's absolutely, everybody recognizes, I think, that what an asset that is. There are other things like, I don't know, women more likely to think about how to take care of other people, maybe. That makes it easier to put a team together. might make it sometimes harder to lead a team if you're not, because you have to be exacting also, as well as nurturing. So, it kind of, there you see, some of the attributes you see go both ways, I would say.
Right.
That's what I would say.
So before I open it up to the questions from our audience, you say you didn't have a mentor, but who inspires you? Like, when you look to, who's the person that you want to be like when you grow up?
Oh, gosh. I'm not a hero worship kind of person. I had a refugee kind of childhood. My parents were from Europe and couldn't go back and had lost all their family, and so it was a very greenfield kind of world for me. And but they put all that investment like immigrant parents do in the kid. So it wasn't. So I actually felt I could do anything. I mean, it was kind of more that, and finding the next place to play, the next opportunity, the next thing to do. That's maybe a little bit different dynamic than thinking about somebody you specifically admire. It was more thinking about that wide open world that they'd made it possible for me to operate in. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the Lean In campaign always talks about what are you afraid of? Like, what's making you afraid? But it sounds like you're saying you didn't really have that. You just were raised to think, I can do whatever I want to do, and I should just go do it.
I should just go do it. And then, I think so. Yeah. But the other thing is, there's, then life happens too, right? So I also had some big bumps. The academic husband died young and left me with 2 small kids, and I, whatever the joy of accomplishment became the determination to accomplish for a while to navigate that. So it's not all roses, but I think just I've been lucky and it's worked out. I'm really happy about it.
Although it is interesting because, as you say, it hasn't all been easy. Because when people hear that, you have been a widow and at a young age and so on, I mean, I don't think that's a future anybody thinks is a really great one, right?
No.
And yet, part of it is sort of dealing with the bumps in the road and sort of going forward.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Well, I would say there was a time, so just we'll get the personal part. I think this is what happened in the session before this.
Right.
I think there was a time when my kids were little that I contemplated doing what many women do, which is kind of ramp your career back a bit. And I didn't do it because he died of a brain tumor. He had a first version of it when I was really early in my career, and from that experience, you're always kind of living under the shadow. And I thought, I don't have the luxury. It might all be on me one day. Which is actually what happened.
Right.
And so I thought, no, I've got to, there was something on the board out there about work-life balance.
Yeah.
Or, is it life integration? Is it weaving? Is it switching back and forth? And I thought, well, whatever it's going to be, I have to figure that out because.
Right. I don't have much of a choice.
I don't really. So,
yeah.
And I'm happy I took that approach and it all turned out okay.
Yeah.
My biggest accomplishment, I think, is that the kids came through really well.
Yeah.
And they're good.
Yeah. It's amazing. So I know you all must have questions for Christine about her career, how she's gotten where she's been, or just about leadership in general, and we'd love to hear from you.
You guys are really hanging in late in the day.
I know.
And it's so pretty
outside.
Come on down.
Come on. You can come on down. I feel like I'm like one of those Prices Right.
Yeah.
Come on down.
Come on down.
Right.
Hello, Christine. It was a wonderful talk. I am a Kaiser Permanente member, and I really love the Center for Wellbeing. You're doing an amazing job there. I wanted to ask you if you had plans to expand to other countries as well, because the Center for Wellbeing is amazing and other countries need it as well.
Oh, we've, are we expanding to other countries? We're barely expanding to other zip codes. It's really complicated to put together the kind of delivery system approach that we have, but at the same time, because it's a mission-based organization, there's a real interest, right, in trying to have more impact in the world. And so at various times we've been active advising internationally, and we've had, every year we have many sessions with people who come from other countries who are thinking about how to improve their health systems or how to create that tighter integration, either among physicians or between physicians and hospital systems. And so we do a lot of the work that way. And so,
thank you very much.
All right, while you guys are warming up, I'll keep asking Christine questions.
Yeah.
So our midday speaker talked a lot about know yourself and know your strengths, and she made this analogy that if you're good at baseball, like why are you going to try to join the basketball team? You should be in the baseball team and practice hitting and fielding and get to be a better baseball player. So how has that influenced you in knowing yourself and then figuring out how the work follows?
Yeah, so, and that's what all the executive coaches tell you, so
there you go.
That's good advice. I think, and it's interesting because it's also an observation not only about how you manage yourself, but when you manage people, right?
Right.
So when you manage, like if you have a team and you're managing people, are you supposed to repair what's missing, or are you supposed to leverage what the strengths are? And generally speaking, you get a lot further leveraging the strengths as long as you can meet a threshold, right? Because, for example, if you're leading people, you have to be at least a decent manager,
right.
Even if that's not your favorite thing. I do think that's great advice. In my case, I started out from an analytic place, right? Mm-hmm. And as I described, even in doing the brand work, which some people can approach in a pretty novelistic way, emotional way, so it can be done in a highly non-analytic way.
Right.
And I've worked with people who do that. I can't do that, and I don't try to do that. I try to bring the analytic lens into it, and it's actually a pretty good fit, as I told you, for the organizational culture, so that works for me. But it would be hard to do the other thing. So I think that's right.
Part of what we hear often about leaders is that know what you're good at, and then surround yourself with people who have strengths in areas that you don't have.
Yeah.
And is that the way you've built your teams, and how do you think about that?
I think to some degree, and I think, if you are doing that, then inevitably you're leading a team with quite different people, and then you have to do the work of connecting quite different people into something that feels sort of coherent.
Yeah.
And so that's a major part of leadership, right? Is first assembling and then finding the way that people can operate together, which means hearing each other, even though their styles are very different, and all the rest of it. So, it's the work of leadership.
Yeah. I think that's right.
There's somebody there.
There you are.
Hello. Christine, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of Kaiser Health News. I've heard it on NPR. I don't know if it's in association with any other news organizations. But I was curious, as a marketer myself, and given that content marketing is pretty hard to measure, how you sold that or how that kind of came about internally, and how you've been able to prove the success of it as it's rolled out.
Well, that's a really good question. From the marketing work that we do at Kaiser Permanente, we're only, frankly, we're actually only starting to get serious about content marketing in a really systematic way. Up to now, efforts like that have been, I would say, a little bit more toe in the water. And we have, I'm sure you talked about this in the marketing classes, right? There's some things that really, really lend themselves to a clear ROI, and there are other things that are a little bit less direct. And so we have a mix of those things, and I think the one that you mentioned is kind of in a little bit less measurable space. But it's a complement to so much else that is very direct, and it's actually one of the pleasures now of having so much more of the marketing be in the digital context, right? Because you can really track everything, whereas before it was a wish and a prayer, right? for some of the effort. So it's a really good question. I think there are we have the conversation all the time about how to push the envelope on measurement and on this question of return, because the initiatives are, and I think if you're doing a good job, you're often a little bit out ahead of what you can strictly understand, but then you have to quickly bring up behind it the metrics. So it's a great question.
So, I'm sorry, please, go ahead. No, jump up.
Okay, my name is Rona, and I've been dying to ask this question all day long. You guys are two very successful women, and we heard a lot of successful women, but I have to ask, have you guys negotiated your salary over your span of your career? And how have you kind of worked that in? Because you guys are obviously very successful, but that 77 cents to the dollar for men, I have to ask how you guys have addressed that over your career.
Okay.
Good, yeah, please go.
Okay.
I'm a lousy academic, we don't make any money, so.
So I thought it was an anticipation of a question you might have asked.
Yeah.
I was thinking about whether there are examples of having been put overtly at a disadvantage ever, right, in my career. And salary is one of the way that gets expressed. Rank is another way, right?
And for the
And
academic, too.
Pardon?
And for the academic, the ranking.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I did have a situation early on where, or not early on, not that early, but at some point, where our organization has undergone quite a few reorganizations over time. And at one point, a new team was being assembled with people from kind of different functions, peer functions to the one I was in. And when the guy who was putting it together, was a senior VP, was putting it together, was describing the team to me, it was all men and all vice presidents, and then he got to me and he described a director level role. And I said, wait a minute. Excuse me. And I called him on it, and he changed.
So you got what they say.
Yeah. And so, well, that's glaring, right? Something like that's like unbelievably glaring. You can be in a more complicated environment where it's not so glaring, and it takes a while for you to clue in.
It's subtle, but it's there.
Right. This was not subtle. This was really not subtle. But it alerted me, I would say, at that point, to needing to be clear on that. And later on, a few years later, when Artie Southam, the guy who's my boss, was putting his team together, and he was describing this senior VP and that senior VP and the next one, and then it came to me. I was listening very carefully, but he did the right thing. so it's a reality, right?
Yeah.
You always have to have the antenna a little there to make sure, and I think that's true also when you lead people. So I mentioned now I have more of a mixed team, but for quite a while I had mostly women. And I was very focused on trying to make sure that the level at which they were working was recognized at the rank it should be relative to peers in other parts of the organization. So similarly. And you have to advocate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, please.
Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. So you spoke about how you left academia and you reinvented yourself, and I've met very few people that have done that. And when I did it, I left organic chemistry and then somehow decided that I was going to join the tech space. I've kind of had this feeling inside of okay, when are people going to start taking me seriously? When will I feel hey, I'm not just trying to pretend to be someone else that's good at this field that other people have spent their entire career studying. And so I'm curious, if you can talk about when you started to feel like you were hitting your stride and owning the space that you had reinvented yourself in.
Oh, when it was complete?
Yeah, when you feel like that, or how you convince yourself, look, I'm not the outlier, I'm just as good as everyone else that has studied this since the beginning of time.
Well, it's a great question. I think in the journey I took, I eased into it a little bit because when I joined Kaiser Permanente, I joined a department that was made up of a lot of would-be academics, frankly. We were doing all kinds of analytics of different types. Some was actuarial type work, and some was utilization type work, and most people had some kind of degree. And it helped get over this idea that somehow you were supposed to have a different training to be here, right? So I think that's part of what you're getting at. But the other place I would take this is to say, over the course of time, recruiting different people into the organization, there have been people who I've brought in who were academics, including people I was in graduate school with, who never really made the transition. And that can happen. And that's not what you asked, but I'm just going to mention. That's painful. Because, sometimes people come and they say, well, this feels like it could be a university environment. I get to do analytic work. But sort of forget that you're in business or that you have to make decisions. And it isn't about the purity of analytics. It's really about driving, right? Something to happen. And those people, you have to commit. You can't just... So the credentials are good for your kind of arrival. And I honestly, sometimes with the doctors, I trot out the PhD. I don't use it, normally. Right. But with the doctors, I use it. So just kind of up the...
Although, as my children always remind me, you're a fake doctor, Mom.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, they're more gracious than that. They're more gracious.
So I think you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming today. I have a question. You mentioned that about 12 years ago you noticed e-commerce emerging.
Yeah.
And you jumped in there and just did something about it. I'm curious what you see emerging right now and how you're going to address it in the organization.
What's emerging right now? Well, we had this little healthcare reform thing happen. And it really, apart from everything in the news about websites and God knows what, it really has transformed the focus of many actors in the healthcare space, because up to now, most of the business and most of the revenue flowed through corporate clients, right, or public agencies that insured their employees. And now increasingly it's clear to people that either in these public exchanges or private exchanges, which are a big new thing, and also, frankly, so much of the population gets its healthcare coverage through Medicaid. All of these are individual choices that people make. They're not mediated through an employer. And so this whole notion of becoming more of a consumer-driven organization is really has really taken off. And that's so if you're looking at other industries, that's like, oh hum. But for healthcare, it's a big change. And you can see many large national healthcare organizations suddenly doing a lot of consumer brand building that they've never done before because they didn't need to, and now they do. And so you see that. And with that then comes all of the capability, all of the you know, digital kind of consumer acquisition, all that kind of infrastructure that, you know, the Amazons have been the pioneers of, right? And now you kind of see that flowing into the healthcare organizations. And so it's a very interesting world. So we have McKinsey showing up every 3 weeks telling us we ought to think about marketing to consumers. So thank you. We appreciate that. Somebody in my team did a T-shirt for me that says, "Been there, thought that." Anyway, thank you.
Hi. It's interesting that you're from Kaiser because I work at the university where it's like you have administration and you have faculty, and in Kaiser you have, I guess, administration and you have your doctors. So can you describe experiences where you had to exercise influence over people you had no authority over?
All the time. All the time. So, all the time. So, I was just like, where even to begin? So, that happens a lot because, and actually this is perhaps more responsive to the prior question, is that I think we're increasingly making this transition, and the fact that we're more consumer-oriented industry now has helped create the momentum of thinking about how we're designing experiences for our members, as opposed to thinking about how we're facilitating doctors administering medical care. Right? It's the old model. Doctors are administering medical care. And now, because a lot of it is digital and virtual, and there's so much else going on, and there's so many things that people do on their own behalf in managing care, we now understand it. We're kind of flipping it, right? So we're understanding, well, we're really building experiences. When you build an experience, it doesn't just sit in one little piece of the organization where you might have the authority, right? It's flowing across all the silos, so to speak. And so, so increasingly, almost all the work that we're doing is highly cross-functional, relies on assembling teams of people from finance and product and all, you know, kind of all sorts of functions, and all the way through clinical, to understand what is the journey that member or that patient or that customer is going to take, and how do we redesign the touch points and all the elements on that path for them. And all of that work is through influence, frankly, and through enlisting people around a clear understanding of how the business needs to change and how the experience needs to get, you know, driven off of not the way we frame it, but the way the customer is going to experience it and move through. And I think it marks so much of our work now is around that. So, and so how do you do it? Well, it's, you know, you kind of focus on who it's for, what the goal is, getting clarity, all of that, right? So right now we're redesigning the whole consumer financial experience. We used to be an organization where if you had your $5 copay when you came in for a visit, that took care of everything. That's not the world we're in anymore, and we're realizing we have a lot more cost sharing. That's not our sweet spot at all. No. And so now we're realizing, so I'm working with the heads of finance and people who do all sorts of other kinds of functionality, across, and IT, of course, in the organization, to redesign how that's going to be for the member. I hope that helps. Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question. That would be you. Yeah.
Hi, Christine. I'm just going to take this opportunity to market myself. I graduated.
I was waiting for this.
I graduated here at Berkeley 2010. I got my degree in molecular and cell biology, and I'm currently a UC Davis MBA candidate. I applied for the digital marketing internship at Kaiser. So I was just wondering if you have any advice for me.
And they say women don't market themselves well.
No, that's beautiful. So we're about to end the session, and you can come meet me up here. Okay? Okay.
Excellent. So would like all of you to join me in thanking Christine
Thank
for
you.
taking the time out of her Saturday. Thank you.